All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Wednesday, everybody. We are live on AMP. Don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast feed, that AMP is the very first place that you guys can get these shows. We're hitting 4 games from last night. The Los Angeles Lakers, in a very important game in the Western Conference standings, went into New Orleans and dominated the Pelicans. We're going to talk about that game. The Milwaukee Bucks finished an impressive back-to-back by going into Phoenix and winning. Really interesting stuff defensively at the end of that game that I want to get into. The New York Knicks finished off their road trip with a second consecutive win, this time over the Portland Trail Blazers. A lot more of the same stuff we talked about earlier this week, so I want to talk some Knicks. And then at the end of the show, the Toronto Raptors dominated the Denver Nuggets, and a bunch of interesting stuff on both sides of that. That's 4 straight losses for the Nuggets, and the Raptors are above 500 since trading for Jakob Poeltl, and I find them to be a very interesting team, so we're going to talk a little bit about them as well. You guys know the drill before we get started. Subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements. And if for whatever reason you guys miss one of these shows and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish, don't forget you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And last but not least, before we get started, while March Madness takes center stage this week here at The Volume, it's Merch Madness. Just head to The Volume's website and use promo code Merch Madness for 20% off all merchandise from your favorite personalities at The Volume. And if you want a chance to compete against Colin Cowherd, myself, and the rest of the Volume team, join our bracket challenge. Just head to Yahoo and find the group The Volume Merch Madness, or type in bit.ly/Volume Merch Madness. Fill in your bracket, and the top 5 finishers are going to win some free Volume merch. So if you want to compete against me with my bracket, I was going to fill it out yesterday, but I didn't have enough time. I'm going to fill it out today. This particular year, I'm an Arizona fan, so I'm excited about Arizona, but they have some limitations in terms of backcourt skills. So I'm a little nervous for them in this tournament. But hey, we can have some fun. We can compete against each other with brackets, and you guys have a chance to win some merch. So make sure that you guys get up there and fill out a bracket and get a discount on some merch on our website. All right, on that note, let's talk some basketball. So this was a very important game for the Lakers on a couple of different levels. They had just dropped a game against the Knicks that was kind of important, especially under the circumstances in the standings. And they have a back-to-back and a game in Houston tonight that Anthony Davis was going to sit. We knew he was going to sit. It's basically been made clear from the Lakers that they do not want to play him in any back-to-backs the rest of the season. There's one more in April that they'll probably sit him out. So obviously you have a chance to lose in Houston without Anthony Davis. There's a chance that Alperen Sengun is going to play tonight. That obviously is a bad matchup for that Laker front court without Anthony Davis. So you needed to win in New Orleans last night to really have any chance to get into that position that the Lakers want, which is in that 7 to 8 seed, which we'll talk about here more in just a minute. But they just absolutely dominated the matchup. This is a good Pelicans team who is very good at home. For as many issues as they've had, they've been a very good home team, and they just went in there and absolutely demolished them. They were up 40 points in the third quarter. You don't see that too often in the NBA. There's 20-point leads. Occasionally you'll see a 30-point lead. A 40-point lead is utter domination. And what was interesting is, I remember I told you guys after the Knicks game, I was crediting the Knicks. They won that game, but it was a weird game for a bunch of different Lakers. Anthony Davis had his worst game probably in 2 or 3 weeks at that point. Malik Beasley could not buy a shot to save his life. Troy Brown Jr. was 0 for 7 from 3. Austin Reeves was less effective than he usually had been. Jared Vanderbilt, for the first time in his entire time in a Lakers jersey, struggled with the defensive matchup with Julius Randle, albeit with a little bit of an iffy whistle. A lot of guys just didn't play well for the Lakers. And if it wasn't for D'Angelo Russell shooting the lights out, that game probably would have been a lot more ugly than it was. And here's the thing. Bad nights just happen. It's part of being a basketball player. You're not always going to be playing at your absolute best all the time. There are little things in your game that oscillate based on shot result, and when you start to miss some shots, it tends to impact other areas of your game. It's all very natural stuff. But ideally, it's a little more balanced, because in this game against the Pelicans, everybody played amazing. Anthony Davis completely dominated the game from the opening tip, had 20 in the first half, finished with 35 and 17. He pretty typically will destroy traditional centers like Jonas Valanciunas. He'll have more problems when he's going against the OG Anunoby types, or even Isaiah Hartenstein, who's not necessarily a traditional center, is a little bit better of an athlete who can move his feet better. When guys actually force him to shoot over the top, some of his offensive skill limitations will show up. But traditional centers, when he's got a foot speed advantage, that's barbecue chicken every single time. And he absolutely destroyed Jonas Valanciunas in this game. Jared Vanderbilt got back on track by doing just an amazing job guarding Brandon Ingram. He did a good job guarding Brandon Ingram last time, but Brandon just hit a bunch of really tough shots, did a much better job, or really the same job this time, with Brandon missing more shots and dissuading him from even attempting in a lot of cases. Troy Brown Jr. got back on track from 3, 2 for 3. D'Angelo Russell finished 5 for 15, but he actually had a really good first half, I thought. And then Malik Beasley. I just talked in the last game about how he was due for some positive regression. He had been shooting about 32% since he came to the Lakers. While in his career, he's kind of like a high volume 36% kind of guy. I shouldn't say for his career, but for recent history, he's kind of like a 36% high volume guy. And he hit 7 threes in the first half. And guess what he's shooting with the Lakers now? 36%. So that's textbook positive regression there. Rui Hachimura hit a couple of big threes. Wenyen Gabriel, 5 offensive rebounds in 15 minutes. Austin Reeves, 14 points on 5 shots. So the exact opposite of what happened in the Knicks game. Everybody played well. And, ideally, like I said, you want more balance there. You'd rather have a few guys struggle and you win the Knicks game, and then you'd rather have a few guys struggle and you win the Pelicans game, but that's just not how it works all the time. But utter dominance in that game. We're going to talk a little bit about the Pelicans here in just a minute, but now the Lakers are in a 3-way tie for 8th place. And I think we've heard the intel is that LeBron is probably going to miss most of the rest of the regular season. I would be surprised if he didn't play, I'd be surprised if he played more than just even just 2 or 3 games at the end of the season. I'd expect him to come back in early April, play a couple of games. I don't think they're worried about his basketball IQ fit. I don't think they're necessarily worried about a long ramp up there, especially when you get into the postseason and you have more days off between games. So I think they're being cautious there deliberately. And with this current group, I've been saying this. I think they're up to 9-4 now since the trade pieces started playing after that Bucks game after the trade deadline. So 9-4, The Lakers, out of all those teams that are in that mix, now there's kind of like the upper tier, which is like the top 6 teams, right? That's where you've got the Denver Nuggets, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Sacramento Kings, the Suns, the Clippers, and the Warriors, right? They're all kind of in that top 6. And I think that top 6 is pretty set. I give the Lakers an outside chance to crack into that group, but I find it to be relatively unlikely, especially since there's a good chance you end up dropping 1 or 2 of these games in the back-to-backs because of Anthony Davis sitting down, right? So, I think that realistically they're looking at the 7th or the 8th seed, right? This is where I think that's important because and they're 1 game behind Minnesota. I think Minnesota and the Lakers are going to be the 2 teams that end up getting that 7-8 seed in some order. Minnesota's up a game. I'd give them Minnesota's really good. They're playing really good basketball right now. They've unlocked some stuff defensively with Jaden McDaniels and with Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert. So I wouldn't be surprised if they got that 7 seed. Ideally, you want to have a home game for that play-in game, but that play-in game becomes a great opportunity for the Lakers to go into the postseason with a realistic path to get out. So even on the low end, let's say that they get the 8th seed and they have to win in Minnesota. Theoretically, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, this group of players, incredibly locked in defensively, they should be able to go into Minnesota and win, okay? We talked a lot about how perimeter defense was a dynamic that won that game for Minnesota when they beat the Lakers last week. LeBron James kind of flips that dynamic because he's going to be able to get the defense into rotation without having to use your guards to beat people off the dribble. LeBron is way too big and strong for Jaden McDaniels, and Anthony Edwards is going to have to guard D'Angelo Russell. So that matchup is a really good matchup for the Lakers. I think they can win that game. If they win the play-in game, regardless of what, obviously they have a better chance to win it at home, but if they win it as the 8 seed, even on the road, that gives them the 7 seed. I believe Sacramento currently is the 3 seed. I believe they'll surpass Memphis and finish the season as the 2 seed. We'll see. But either way, I like their chances in that first round matchup against Memphis or against Sacramento. It's a great matchup for both of them. Memphis is a bad half-court offense, and the Lakers are an unbelievably good half-court defense after the trade deadline. So I think they'd be able to get a lot of stops, and they'd be much better executing at the end of games. Memphis is a bad execution team. They're a horrible fourth quarter team. Lots of things that favor the Lakers, right? Sacramento, it would just be LeBron James and Anthony Davis utterly bludgeoning Harrison Barnes and Domantas Sabonis for the entire series. I'd pick the Lakers to win both of those series. Then from there, obviously, it depends on how things shake off in the middle of the standings. You could end up with an easier matchup in the second round against a team that you like your chances against, right? But it could just as easily be the Warriors, and you could have a tough matchup. But most importantly, you save the Nuggets for the Western Conference Finals. So things are actually kind of shaping up pretty well here for the Lakers. If they can get into that 7-8 matchup, win a play-in game, they have a realistic pathway to get out of the Western Conference, to keep LeBron's minutes down in the first round of the playoffs so that he can ramp up. And I really think that they have a decent chance there. Obviously, health has to be factored in there. Anthony Davis is healthy now and playing great, but who knows if that will last. And then obviously LeBron needs to get back to the floor without having a setback. So there's a lot of different steps they've got to go through. The Pelicans, this season is super weird. On December 12th, they were 18-8. That was the best record in the Western Conference, the third best record in the league. During that span, they were 5th in offense and 3rd in defense. So it looked like a bona fide Western Conference contender. Since then, 15-28. 5th worst record in all of basketball, 26th in offense and 18th in defense. And now I haven't watched a ton of Pelicans this year. I've seen probably 20, 25 Pelicans games. And so I really encourage Pelicans fans who are listening to give their 2 cents in the comments. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. The couple of things that stand out to me when I watch them, though. One, their wings aren't as good defensively as they should be, right? Like Brandon Ingram on the games that I've watched him is still getting lost without the basketball or off ball quite a bit. He's not taking the higher level on-ball assignments because they're giving those to Herb Jones, obviously. And then Trey Murphy, he's got the athleticism, and I do believe one day he'll be a good wing defensive player, but he hasn't been great. And so as good as they have all these wings, but Herb Jones is really the only guy that's impacting the game defensively at a high level. And then their point of attack defense is just disastrous. CJ McCollum is not providing any impedance on those initial dribble penetrations. And when you get the Pelicans into rotation, it's a lot to ask to run around and chase shooters when Jonas Valanciunas is on the floor and you don't have great foot speed. Although they've been cutting back on Jonas's minutes a lot lately, so it hasn't been as much of an issue there. But I don't think defensively they're nearly as good as they should be given their personnel. And I think you've seen a lack of fight. There's a weird energy around the team. They're having a lot of games where they lay down and lose, but then you'll watch them on another night. Like I think they beat the hell out of Portland the other night. So like there's kind of like a weird competitive energy. They don't have a lot of guys that like to play hard as like a natural part of their basketball identity. And I think that's a little bit of an issue for them. And then on the offensive end, I think it's a lack of rim pressure. Using that same December 12th date, which before December 12th, Zion played most of the games. After December 12th, Zion only played a couple of the games before he got out. But they're not generating any rim pressure because all of their offensive initiators are guys that like to hunt pull-up jump shots, right? So CJ McCollum is coming off these screens. He's not relentlessly attacking the rim. He's trying to get to his pull-up jump shot. Brandon Ingram, same thing. He's not relentlessly attacking the rim. He's trying to get to his pull-up jump shot. And the reason why you need those guys that like to get downhill and go to the rim is that's what collapses the defense to get you higher quality three-point shots than the tougher shots that you get when you're not getting that type of dribble penetration. That's what Zion Williamson did for this team. Forget about the defensive limitations. Forget about like some of the half-court stuff when he can plow into too many bodies and have some turnovers and things like that. Just having him on the floor provides that rim pressure element that just opens everything up for them offensively. And even then, Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum are attacking with more of an advantage and getting better looks out of that. So I think you're seeing that specifically in their lack of drive and kick basketball. And that shows up in assists per game. So before December 12th, they were 6th in assists per game, and they were the 13th best team in the league at taking care of the ball in turnovers per game. After December 12th, again, most of that without Zion, they're down to 20th in assists per game. And they have the 6th most turnovers per game in that span. So as you could tell, like flipping the dynamic from it being a Zion-oriented team, attacking the rim, playing drive and kick off of that, to suddenly a lot of high ball screens and dribble handoffs with Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum hunting dribble pull-up jump shots. I think that's hurting them a lot. I think you saw that a lot against the Lakers last night. Like, how many possessions did you see Trey Murphy just dribble the ball up the floor and take a transition three? CJ McCollum dribble up the floor and they were just running up the floor and shooting threes. There's no dribble penetration and no driving and kicking. And I think that's slowing down their offense. Again, I haven't watched too much of the Pelicans this year. So Pelicans fans who are listening, if you think I'm wrong about that, or if you have another perspective to add, drop it in the comments. All right, Bucks Suns. This was an absolute defensive masterclass from the Milwaukee Bucks down the stretch in the fourth quarter. I thought it was really interesting to watch the dynamic of shot creation on both ends, okay? I talk a lot about perimeter defense on this show and how that ends up being the thing that stops the offense from getting into that wheel. We just talked about it with the Pelicans, right? So look at how this dynamic switched at the end of this game. You know, things were a little bit open floor, a little bit more loose, and Cam Payne hits a couple of pull-up threes, and the Suns have, I think, a 3-point lead. But down the stretch, both teams go to their closing groups, and Phoenix couldn't score. So when Devin Booker was the lead ball handler, they had Jrue Holiday on the ball, and Jrue Holiday did an amazing job guarding Devin Booker, as he usually does. And Devin will have his nights every once in a while where he hits tough shots over the top of Jrue, but Jrue has guarded him a lot over the years, and he's starting to figure out his moves a little bit, and he's starting to have more success. They had a matchup earlier this year where Jrue had a key steal on Devin Booker at the end of the game, if you guys remember. In this game, when Devin Booker had the ball, Milwaukee was running an aggressive drop coverage. So Lopez is coming high out of his drop, almost to catch hedge up at the level of the screen, and Jrue Holiday's playing super physical, chasing Devin Booker over the top. Then they're conceding the roll man. They're letting DeAndre Ayton catch the ball going downhill, and Giannis Antetokounmpo is blowing that up every single time. I want to wait to get into it a little bit deeper here in just a second, but Giannis's help defense is such a ridiculous problem to deal with as an opposing offense because of what he can do, taking away the weak side corner and the roll man. We'll get back into that in just a second. But I thought it was super interesting that they were hyper aggressive with Devin Booker, ignoring the roll man to contain him. But then when Chris Paul had the ball, Brook Lopez was sagging all the way back. And basically, Joe Ingles, and Joe Ingles is not, everything defensively has to do with how you can contribute to your scheme, not necessarily what your skill set is. Like if Joe Ingles played for the Clippers and they don't have rim protection and they're switching everything and it's a lot of isolation defense and you need your man to contain the ball, he's going to get beat off the dribble a lot. That's not his strength. He's not going to be able to recover and block shots at the rim as a wing. But if you simplify his responsibility by having Brook Lopez basically parking his ass right under the basket, now all of a sudden he doesn't need to contain Chris Paul as a ball handling, as a guy driving to the basket. All he needs to do is chase him over the top of the screen and apply a little bit of back pressure so that Chris Paul doesn't get off those easy little 15-footers. The only time Chris Paul was able to get decent looks down the stretch were floaters over the top of Brook Lopez going downhill. And Chris Paul is going through a phase of his career where he doesn't like to be aggressive as a scorer. So Joe Ingles was actually doing a really nice job applying that back pressure and stopping Chris from getting to those high-quality twos. And he didn't have to worry about the rim because that's where Brook was. And so it was super interesting to see that dynamic. Hyper-aggressive against Devin Booker, trying to turn him into a passer, which is what he can do but doesn't want to do. And then against Chris Paul, playing super passive and trying to turn him into a scorer, which he can do but doesn't want to do. I thought it was a super interesting defensive strategy from the Bucks, and they strangled the Suns down the stretch of this game. This is where I want to get into the Giannis dynamic. So in pick and roll defense, or it's in every type of defense, but let's just use pick and roll as example. So in pick and roll defense, there are basically two backline responsibilities, right? So theoretically, you're going to have your on-ball defender that's going to have some job depending on the coverage. He's either going to go under the screen or he's going to go over the screen, or he's going to deny the screen if they're icing, which is usually on the side of the floor. The pick and roll defender, the screen defender, he's doing basically one of three things. He's either in a high drop up at the level of the screen, he's in a low drop back at the basket, or he's trapping or blitzing the screen, right? And some combination of that is going to make your pick and roll coverage. But let's use the Devin Booker one as an example. Devin Booker's coming off the ball screen. Lopez and Jrue are both out, right? Lopez is high out of the drop, to contain that pull-up shot. Drew's chasing over the top. DeAndre Ayton is rolling to the basket. This is where the low man comes into the play. And the low man is just what most NBA teams refer to it as, but basically it's just the help defender that's in the weak side corner. And usually it's a guard or a wing, and most of guards or wings will opt to try to take a charge. So like a lot of teams will run drills where they'll practice this, where you're guarding a shooter in the weak side corner, and there'll be a roll man kind of catching the ball going towards the basket, and you sprint to the top of the charge circle and you set your feet and you take a charge and you fall backwards, right? What makes Giannis so interesting is that backline low man defender is he's defending that as an above the rim defender. So like when they're throwing the ball to that roll man, Giannis is elevating and disrupting the lob pass at the rim. If you try to catch, he's coming flying. There was a play at the end of this game where DeAndre Ayton was there for the catch, and Giannis just came in and swiped it clean from his hands as he caught it in the middle of the floor. But at the same time, most teams, when that guard steps in to take that charge or whatever, that opens up the skip pass. And now that shooter in the weak side corner is wide open. What makes Giannis such a frightening help defender is he can split the difference. And on those plays, he doesn't have to commit to the roll man or commit to the weak side corner. He can just stand in the middle, and he's such a freak athlete that regardless of which pass you make as the ball handling guard, he's blowing it up. If you throw the skip pass, he's stealing that thing. If you throw it to the roll man, he's blowing that up too. It completely disrupts that pick and roll as the weak side defender, because most teams don't want to bring in that weak side defender if they can avoid it, because that's how they get wide open threes on the back line. Every team in a dream scenario would like to defend pick and roll 2-on-2 if they can help it. But especially against teams like the Suns that have such gifted ball handlers and guys like DeAndre Ayton, you almost have to bring in that third defender. That's where the Suns were getting all that stuff in the past with Mikal Bridges, right? Mikal Bridges on the skip pass, knocking down corner threes or attacking closeouts and hitting those little drifting jumpers in the lane. Now Mikal Bridges is gone from that equation, which makes it a little bit tougher because you don't have as much skill over there, but it doesn't matter because Giannis would have swallowed that up too. Giannis is just this world-beating help defender that can contain that, be the third man in that pick and roll defense while simultaneously not leaving a shooter open because of his recovery athleticism. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a game last year that I talked a lot about. Some of you guys who listened to the show back then will remember this. But there was a game against the Mavericks in the Bucks where Luka was running a lot of high pick and roll and Giannis was in that low man position. And as a result, like Luka was drawing Giannis in to help on that roll man and then throwing the skip pass and making textbook Luka fantastic skip passes. And on those skip passes, Giannis just immediately was recovering out to the corner and taking away the shot. And that defender, that offensive player in the weak side corner was just passing out of it because he just had nothing. And so it was disrupting Dallas's whole offense. And so what Luka did, if you guys remember, which I thought was super interesting, is he started calling for Giannis in the ball screen. And he would get Giannis on the switch or get him trailing him on the ball screen and then make that same skip pass. He's not trying to score on Giannis. He's just trying to get that same help rotation from Milwaukee while throwing to a shooter in the weak side corner with a much worse help defender making that rotation, and he started to get some good looks in the weak side corner from that. That's a random game from last year to demonstrate this concept. And that's going to be the thing that teams are going to have to do if they want to have any hope of beating that Bucks defensive coverage in pick and roll. You're going to have to, as crazy as it sounds, start pulling Giannis up into the ball screen because you have a much better chance getting an open shot on the backside from a different help defender than you do from Giannis hawking everything on the backside of the floor. It's such a weapon to have in a playoff series. And it was a huge factor down the stretch of this Suns game, blowing up their pick and roll when they were getting those stops at the end. And then on the other end of the floor, Joe Ingles. He's been one of my favorite signings of this season. Obviously he brings that important spot up shooting element that the Bucks need so badly with Giannis on the floor, but he's also just like a pretty damn solid initiator offensively, and the Bucks ran a lot of offense through him down the stretch of this game. Once again, matchups, right? Drew Holiday is drawing Josh Okogie, and Josh Okogie's actually a pretty damn good point of attack defender. He had a rough night against the Warriors last night. The rest of the Suns' point of attack defense is hot garbage, but Josh Okogie is pretty solid. So from a matchup perspective, Drew attacking Josh Okogie wasn't as good of an option as it was for Joe Ingles to run the action with Chris Paul as his defender. Chris Paul is not in the same stratosphere of a defender as he was when he was younger, and Joe is giving him all kinds of problems. Chris in particular is really struggling navigating over the top of ball screens, but there were 3 big plays that Joe Ingles made at the end of this game that ended up sealing the game offensively for the Bucks. First, there was a play where he ran just a regular ball screen, kind of going to his right. Chris died on the screen. Joe Ingles just rose up and knocked down a pull-up 3. That's that offensive skill that you need to beat that particular coverage, and he was getting better separation from Chris Paul than Drew Holiday was getting from Okogie. Then he made 2 plays rolling down the rim as a ball handler. One was out of a dribble handoff, one was out of a pick and roll, but it's the same concept. Ball screen / dribble handoff from Brook Lopez. The first one was with Chris Paul. The second one was with Torrey Craig, who's also not a good point of attack defender when it comes to navigating screens and stuff like that, or handling quicker guards, which Ingles is not, but he was going over his screen. On this play, on both of these plays, Ingles just takes a wide banana route basically around the screen and just starts to get downhill towards the rim. And DeAndre Ayton, as Chris Paul or Torrey Craig is getting caught on the screen, has to step up to contain Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles is a big 6'7" lefty that can finish that left-handed layup off the glass, so he's got to step over. Now, Chris Paul or Torrey Craig, they have to recover and dig down on Brook Lopez to stop him from catching as the roll man. But what Ingles did, which was really smart, is on both of these plays, he threw the ball high to Brook Lopez. So he just kind of threw like a little popping lob pass into Lopez as he's rolling to the rim so that Lopez could catch high and finish high. Why is that important? Because what do smaller defenders do when a bigger player catches around them? They attack the ball down low. So if he throws a bounce pass to Lopez there, Chris Paul can swipe at it. If he throws a bounce pass to with Torrey Craig there, Torrey Craig can swipe at it. By keeping it high, he allowed Brook Lopez to catch high and finish high. And they got 2 big layups from Brook Lopez down the stretch of that game that helped seal the game on the offensive end of the floor. It was just and obviously Giannis was amazing again, but we talked a lot about him yesterday, so I'm not going to get into it. It was just a really impressive championship level type of back-to-back from the Bucks. That's not an easy back-to-back to win, to go into Sacramento when they desperately want to win that game in a raucous crowd and to win. And then, yeah, I know the Suns are down Kevin Durant, but they're still at home, a tough team with a lot of offensive skill, and that's just not an easy game to win. And it was an impressive back-to-back from them. For Phoenix, that's the second game in a row where point of attack defense was an issue for them. Obviously, Torrey Craig and Chris Paul we just talked about. Last night, it was a lot of Josh Okogie and Devin Booker struggling, and then obviously Damian Lee and Devin Booker as well, struggling to communicate switches that they were leaving the Warriors open. That all it says to me is that they're going to need an otherworldly defensive effort from Kevin Durant to win the title, which for the record, I think he's capable of. We just talked about that weak side help defender role from Giannis. That's the role that Kevin Durant has to have. They're going to need to have Ayton and whoever their point of attack defender guard the pick and roll aggressively in the playoffs, which is going to leave the roll man open. And they're going to need Kevin Durant to be able to blow up those Brook Lopez catches while at the same time recover into shooters on the weak side. It's going to be a lot to ask, but Kevin Durant does have the athleticism to do that. And that to me is going to be the swing factor for Phoenix this year. Can Kevin Durant be a good enough help defender to compensate for Phoenix's bad point of attack defense? One other note on Phoenix too. It was a big issue that they had to go to Chris Paul down the stretch offensively, and he wasn't aggressive enough as a scorer. This just goes back to what I said at the beginning when they made the Kevin Durant trade. The ultimate ceiling for this team, again, because everything is different when you're talking about the 26 or 27 opponents you'll face that are not championship level rosters, and then the 3 or 4 teams that you'll face that are championship level rosters defensively. The way that changes the way the game goes. When all that easy stuff is taken away and you really need to grind out quality shots, the Bucks are such a great example of that. And that's why I look at Kevin Durant as the guy they're going to need to use as their primary on-ball guy and a little bit less of him off-ball, because at the end of that game, your best chance of getting a good look against the Milwaukee Bucks is Kevin Durant is going to have to be the guy that draws in that initial defensive attention. All right, we're going to hit on a couple of Eastern Conference big wins from last night as well. The New York Knicks won a big game in Toronto. And I keep confusing Toronto and Portland. In Portland against the Trailblazers. Dame was going off for 2.5 quarters, and Portland had 4 different double-digit leads. They were controlling the game. But there was an interesting adjustment there down the stretch of the third quarter, and specifically offensively from the Knicks. to get going in transition that I thought changed the game. So they started kind of trapping Dame as much as they can, getting the ball out of his hands, being more aggressive off of guys like Trendon Watford and Matisse Thybulle, and conceding them open shots to try to contain the skill players. And so they were getting stops. And then from there, and, we saw this a lot against the Lakers the other night too, where, the New York Knicks are a bad half-court offense, even with Jalen Brunson. Like, they're a middle-of-the-pack half-court offense. So what do you do when you're a bad half-court offense? You need to try to avoid the half-court environment as much as possible. And without Jalen Brunson, you're an even worse half-court offense, right? Because he's your best half-court surgeon. So the best way to avoid that is to push in transition. And they keep going with these 3-guard lineups as of late, which I think is super fascinating. And again, it's matchup dependent. They're not going to be able to do that against everybody. They did it against a Laker team, that didn't have a forward star and was relying a lot on their guards to create stuff. They did it against this Portland team that doesn't have a lot of forward shot creation and is relying on their guards to create stuff. So a lot of it has to do with matchups. But they've been going with these smaller lineups, and they're just running the ball down everyone's throat. Like the sheer amount of transition threes that they got. Miles McBride, who I found out today is called Deuce McBride. Deuce McBride hit 4 threes, I believe, like 4 transition threes down the stretch of this game. And he hasn't shot the ball particularly well this season. But again, if you're going to get those high quality shots, and apparently he has a good history of shooting back when he was in college. So it's just a lot of it has to do with role, guys. Like, if you're not getting as many touches as you might think, it disrupts your rhythm. And then you don't really get a chance to dial in and fine tune your shot on the floor, and you're going to miss a lot of shots. And Jalen Brunson being out has bought Deuce McBride more minutes, and he's capitalizing on that. But it all starts with rim pressure. Guys like Emmanuel Quickley and Josh Hart flying down the floor in transition, attacking the rim, but not forcing shots over length at the rim, throwing those kick-out passes to trailing shooters. And one of the big reasons why transition threes are such a high percentage shot, especially when the ball has popped around a little bit. I'm not talking about like walking into a three. Those are tough shots. And there's a few guys in the league that are really good at them, but they're tough shots. But when you get transition threes that are off kickouts, when guys attack the rim, your feet are set and your momentum is carrying you forward to the rim. So if I'm trailing down the left wing and Josh Hart drives and he makes a kick out to Julius Randle in the left corner, Julius Randle makes a shovel pass to me and I'm Deuce McBride trailing on the left wing, I've got my feet set. My momentum is carrying forward because I was running up the floor. So I always talk about how jump shooting has a lot more to do with legs than people realize. That transition three kind of has the legs part baked into it because you're already moving forward. So then you can really focus on getting a good balanced shot attempt with good lift. And that's a high percentage shot. And they were killing them with transition threes. Like I said, Deuce McBride made 4 of them. I think Emmanuel Quickley came in and made a couple. Josh Hart was attacking the rim in transition. They were drawing fouls. Like it just was a bludgeoning in transition of Portland's defense. They went on a 21-5 run, and the game was basically over. It was a nice way to end their road trip. They lost a couple of tough games, but then they went and won 2 tough road games. That Lakers team, like I said, they're 9-4. Including the Knicks loss, since they made the trades. That's not an easy team to beat, and they won that game. The Blazers, as freaking terrible as they've been, they're 17-16 at home. They were 17-15 going into that game. It's not an easy win, and they went in there and they got it done. So nice work for the Knicks. They've been like the Knicks. I was a huge Knicks skeptic for the first half of the season, and they've been really impressive here down the stretch. And I do actually believe that they have a puncher's chance to win a series or two, which is not something I would have said in the last couple of months. All right, before we get out of here, Nuggets Raptors. So Denver was on a 3-game losing streak coming in. They had all these defensive issues, so you wanted them to come in and bring in a better defensive effort to try to right the ship, and it just could not have been further from the truth. They were incredibly sloppy, especially off ball. Toronto took a lot of advantage of Denver's entry points, like I talk about a lot. They ended up giving up 49 points in the first quarter. So an unserious defensive effort once again from Denver. Toronto led by 24 points in the third quarter. Yes, Denver made a little bit of a run. They got it back to 3, but we've talked about this before. This is a very common thing that happens in the NBA. Team who's playing better gets out to a huge lead. Then they let their foot off the gas. Team that's down big finally starts to show a little bit of fight. They grind their way back. As soon as they start to get a little bit close, the team that's been playing better locks back in, and the team that had to expend all that energy to get back in the game gets fatigued, and the lead grows right back up. They got it to within 3 in the fourth quarter, and then Toronto was back 17. They were up by 17 before the end of the game. So I don't really look at the comeback as much. Toronto completely dominated this game. I do want to talk a little bit more about Denver and their entry points here in just a second, but I want to focus on Toronto for a minute because there's something super interesting going on in Toronto. Now, since the Poeltl trade, they're 7-6. Doesn't sound that interesting, right? They're in the play-in tournament as of right now. I think they're in the 9 seed or something like either 8 or 9. But here's what's interesting to me. Their starting lineup is destroying people. Even in the Lakers game that they lost, their starters destroyed everyone in that game. And the reason why, I'll go into the numbers first. They are plus 57 in their first 150 minutes together. They're outscoring teams by 19 points per 100 possessions. They have a 125 offensive rating, which is off the charts good, and a 107 defensive rating, which is extremely good. And it comes down to a couple things. They're a huge matchup problem for teams. They've always played a lot of big players, but one of the reasons why it didn't quite work is they didn't have a natural rim protector, and most wing defenders, they didn't grow up playing rim protector, so they're not good at that specific skill. And a lot of traditional defensive coverages require a decent rim protector, especially pick and roll coverages, right? So it's slotted Toronto into a more natural configuration as a defensive team, right? On the offensive end of the floor, it has provided them with matchup flexibility that just about, I'll just go out and say it, no other team in the league has. So Fred VanVleet is an excellent on-ball creator, and he's going to draw the other team's best point of attack defender, right? One of the three of OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Pascal Siakam is going to get a small guard. The second smallest guy in the opposing lineup is going to end up guarding one of Toronto's big forwards. And chances are that your small forward is also going to be giving up an advantage because Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam in particular are both gigantic human beings and bigger than your traditional small forwards that you see around the league. For instance, like Minnesota, and you're playing, Gobert and Kyle Anderson. Jaden McDaniels at the 3 is going to be giving up a solid 20 pounds of muscle and 3 inches to Siakam or Barnes. Like, he's going to be giving up a physical advantage there. So what ends up happening is, like, they're a brute force offense. There's not a lot really pretty about what they're doing. It's a lot of just who's got the better matchup, give that guy the ball. He's going to back him down until somebody helps. When somebody helps, we'll play drive and kick from there. And part of it is they're shooting really well. Like, that group is shooting 40% from 3 in their 150 minutes together. But in the games that I've watched them, a lot of it is shot quality. Like, is that going to come down a little bit? Maybe. Like that, there are some guys in that lineup that are inconsistent shooters that have been knocking down some shots, but like OG Anunoby is locked in with his spot-up shooting right now. Like Pascal Siakam has had stretches this year where he's locked in and he's knocking down shots, and a lot of it is shot quality. And if you can get the defense into rotation by constantly having a size mismatch, you're going to get high-quality catch-and-shoot threes. And if you get high-quality catch-and-shoot threes, it is possible that you're going to shoot 40%. Now, there will be teams that are going to be able to match up a little bit better with them. I don't view them as a title favorite, or even a contender, but they are an interesting play-in team who at least is going to be a pain in the ass to deal with. And if they can figure out a way to get that success from the starting lineup to translate through to other areas of the game, either by staggering a little bit better or by bolstering their bench in the coming season, this offseason, they could become a very interesting team. Because there was intel that Toronto believes, that Masai Ujiri still believes in this core. And that basically what they did around the trade deadline was purposefully pretend like they were going to trade some guys just to gauge their value. And then they went the complete opposite direction and gave up a first-round pick for Jakob Poeltl, right? So, like, clearly they're still thinking all in, even if they were bluffing to blow up. And that tells you that they still believe. And I can see why. When that group, that starting lineup, has already been one of the better plus-minus lineups in the league in terms of their total plus-minus for the season in just 150 minutes together. That's a lot to be encouraged about. outscoring teams by 19 points per 100 possessions. That's like Golden State Warriors starters type of dominance, albeit in a smaller sample size. So like it is interesting, and I can see why Masai Ujiri is excited about them. But this is where I want to get into Denver, because I talked a lot about Denver's entry points. And what I've always said about Denver is like you can put together the facsimile of a good regular season defense, but when you get into the postseason, it becomes more about matchups, right? And the two guys in particular, like Jokic was bad defensively in this game, as he's been for most of this season. But in this particular game, I thought the guards were the problem. Jamal Murray and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in particular. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is competing. It's not that. It's just he's giving up too much weight. This goes back to what we were talking about. Like Jamal Murray and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope are your starting backcourt. You've got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope matched up with one of those big forwards, and they were just going right at him and drawing those help defenders. And specifically guys like Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray got lost a couple times. Jokic was getting beat on the back line. I shared a clip of that today. When that second defender was coming in, the Toronto players were doing a good job of relocating along the three-point line and cutting to the basket, and they were just losing guys. And that was a big part of how they had 49 points in the first quarter. That's what concerns me about entry points. Your scheme doesn't matter at all when they just take one of your defenders and back him down. From there, you have no choice but to double. And then once you double, you're in rotation. So it doesn't matter what your pick and roll coverage is. It doesn't matter how good Aaron Gordon might be as your backline help defender blowing up stuff at the basket on the weak side corner if they don't even have to run a pick and roll. And they can just walk down one of your smaller defenders, bring in that help, and play driving kickball from there. That's the kind of thing that you're going to see a lot of teams do. Why would you play into Denver's base scheme defensively when you can just attack one of their smaller defenders? And I think you're going to see a lot of teams do that. And then once you start playing drive and kick, it's Jokic trying to chase guys around in rotation, getting pulled away from the rim. That's where things can get ugly for them. Denver is allowing 125 points per 100 possessions in their last 4 games. That is dead last in the NBA over that span. They have now slipped down to 18th in defensive rating for the season. If you guys remember before the season, I said that I expected Denver to be the best offense in the league. And they have been for most of the season. They've been one of the top offenses in the league. But I said they didn't necessarily need to be a top 10 defense because of how good their offense was. And I genuinely believe Denver is going to get a lot of good shots when they get into the postseason. I do not think scoring is going to be an issue for them. Jokic's offensive skill set has been proven to translate to the postseason resoundingly. But on the defensive end, they need to be sharper. I said before the season I wanted to see them finish between 10 and 15 for me to give them a legitimate chance to win the title. And they just haven't been sharp enough. And what concerns me the most is not just that they're 18th, but that they're slipping towards the end of the season. Because if the only way you can succeed without good defensive personnel is with extremely sharp defensive principles, and they're getting sloppy in those areas. I've talked all the time that one of the big reasons why I do value offense over defense when I'm evaluating players is because of the fact that you can coach up a team to be a functional defense in a way that you can't coach up an offense to be functional against good defenses. And so they've got to be sharper. They've got to lock in down the stretch. Mike Malone was talking after the game about how they got to get their swagger back. Yes, you do, because you're running out of time, and it's getting ugly. I want to talk a little bit about Jamal Murray really quick before we get out of here. So Jamal Murray, since returning from his injury, took like 6 games off. He's averaging 19 points and 7 assists, which is okay, but he's shooting 39% from the field and 34% from 3. Now, in his defense, he's been dealing with the nagging knee thing. He left early from that Nets game the other night. So obviously I talk a lot about pull-up jump shooting and how important your lift is, and you got to jump in order to make that work. So obviously that's playing a role. But this team has no championship ceiling if Jamal Murray can't play like an all-star. So if his knee is an issue, that kind of removes Denver from the equation. The main reason why is because with the way that Jokic plays, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with Anthony Davis and how he needs that high-level guard. Like, Jokic can win games as a floor raiser with anybody, even just 4 league average role players. So I want to be clear, like, as a floor raiser, he might be the best in the league. But when we are talking about the championship ceiling, again, what we were talking about with Phoenix, talking about those top tier defenses. The 3 or 4 teams that you might have to go through that have defensive personnel that are going to take you out of all of your core stuff and force you to have incredible high level shot creation. When you get to that level, Jokic needs Jamal Murray at an all-star level, especially with the way they operate. So much inverted pick and roll, so many dribble handoffs from the top of the key. None of that is working at the highest levels unless you have Jamal Murray as that high-level, three-level shot creator that he can be. And so it is concerning. He represents Jamal Murray represents Denver's ceiling. Obviously, Jokic is the best player. He's the floor raiser. But we've seen so many times over the course of his career, he's kind of like LeBron in the earlier phases of his career before LeBron became an excellent shot maker. He doesn't want to break you down by taking tough fadeaways and going into his bag to score at the end of these games. He likes to score within the flow of the offense. And so they need a guy who can be their aggressive shot maker, just like LeBron needed Kyrie, right? In the earlier phases. Now, LeBron, when he got to the Lakers, by the time 2017, 2018, and 2020 came around, he had advanced so far as a shot maker that he became that guy. And then when he got to with Anthony Davis, he was the high-level shot maker for that team. But Jokic is not that guy yet. We literally saw him in a situation against Joel Embiid where Joel Embiid was shooting his face off on one end of the floor, and on the other end of the floor, Jokic that's not his game. That's not his game. He's playing in the flow of the offense. And so he needs that guy. And that guy is Jamal Murray. And if he's not going to be that guy, that's a big concern. So it goes deeper than the defensive end. They also are only averaging about 113 points per 100 possessions on offense during the 4-game losing streak. That's not good enough. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I think things get even tougher for them on the schedule now as they go on the road. So it doesn't look pretty for Denver right now. They better get it together before they get to the end of the season. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. We have one more daytime show tomorrow, and covering Warriors, Clippers, and some other games from tonight's slate. Then we're taking Friday off. We'll have a Saturday afternoon show, taking Sunday off, and then we're getting into next week. As always, I sincerely appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.